And welcome to the May 1st, 2024 Board of Supervisors meeting. Let's start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start off with the roll call. Supervisor Blundy.
Here.
Supervisor Ross. Here. Supervisor McCartney.
Present.
Right on time. Supervisor Lewis.
Hi. Here.
Joining us via Zoom. He's asked me to chair the meeting this evening, given that he's on Zoom. So you'll be hearing me more than usual tonight. So I apologize. Item number 4, community announcements. Reminder, during this portion of the agenda, residents and youth organizations may call in to make special announcement or contact the township at admin@lmt.org to request a special announcement be added to the agenda. Anybody on the phone or online? No lights, so we're good. All right. 4B, the Parks and Recreation Department is hiring for summer camp positions. To apply, please visit www.lmt.org. Registration for the pool at LMT. To register, please visit again, www.lmt.org. Lower Makefield Township is hosting a Red Cross blood drive on Friday, May 3rd from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. in the main meeting room at the Township Building, 1100 Edward Road, which is right here. To sign up or get more information, log on to redcrossblood.org and enter sponsor code Lower Makefield, all one word, capital L, capital M. If I can pronounce this. Lower Makefield Pickleball event has been rescheduled to May 11th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. at Memorial Park. Registration is now reopened via court reserve. Those that previously registered don't need to re-register. The Lower Makefield Yard Waste Drop-Off site will be open on Saturday, May 18th between the hours of 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. All right, what's next? And that is the end of the list for community announcements. Do any supervisors have any announcements? Anyone in the public? All right. Moving right along to public comment on non-agenda items. At this time, if you have any public comment on items that do not appear on the agenda, please feel free to come to the podium, and reminder to please state your name and whether or not you're a Lower Makefield resident. Any public comment?
Yeah, and I'm gonna change my mind and say I have something to add.
Go right ahead.
The Yardley Makefield Fire Company lost one of their members this past weekend, and I beg forgiveness as I am a terrible phonetic reader. But Chief Charles Bubba Schlosser passed away. He'd given a number of years of service to our township as well as Morrisville's, and I would ask that everybody keep his family in their prayers. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Continuing on item 5, I don't believe we have any public comment online or on the phone. So no, okay. All right, item number 6, as we've been doing a consent agenda this year, there are items A through F. Does anybody wish to remove any of the items from the consent agenda for public discussion?
I'd like to move 6C, please.
Sure. Do we need a second for that or just one person? Okay. I agree with you anyway, if we need it. So, okay. So with that, before we, any other items that anyone would like to remove? Other members of the board or in the public? Okay. So
Just so that no one is wondering what 6C is, Dan, could you just tell people?
Sure. It's related to approval of BOMA's deer management proposal for the 2024-2025 season. So I believe when we remove it, we first vote on the consent agenda items, then we'll open it up to remarks and comments on 6C.
That's correct.
Okay.
I'd like to make a movement to approve the remaining consent agenda items.
Second.
All right. Have a motion and a second. Any comments from the public? Okay. That being said, I'll call the question. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Any opposed? Hearing none, consent agenda passes 5-0. Item 6C, this is related to the approval of the BOMA deer management proposal for 2024-2025 season. Mr. Crasser, could you give us a brief summary on this? Not to speak for you, Mr. McCartney, but I think part of the reason we wanted to remove this from the consent agenda is last go around with the BOMA plan, we had some concerns from the public in certain areas. So we just want to make sure that those concerns are addressed and that I think they have been based on what I've seen, but also so that we can allow the public to understand what the plan is this year. You could.
Happy to, Mr. Vice Chair. So as noted, this relates to a deer management program that the township has engaged in since I believe it was 2009. The BOMA organization, which is the Big Oak Whitetail Management Association, has been responsibly hunting township-owned property again since 2009 without incident, consistent with the laws of the Commonwealth. As was discussed last year, the members of the organization are required to be of a certain age, pass a proficiency test, undergo training administered by the Pennsylvania Game Commission in terms of bow hunting, undergo background checks, and then are individually insured as well. The expressed sort of concern last year relative to the one parcel. This proposal does not have that parcel being hunted, so it is consistent with the proposal that was ultimately decided upon last year, and the terms of the agreement are consistent with the terms as they've previously existed in prior years. So, as it relates to that specific issue that was discussed last year, again, the proposal addresses that and does not incorporate that site into the proposed properties to be hunted by BOMA.
Good enough. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the BOMA deer management proposal for 2024-2025.
Second?
All right, open it up for supervisor discussion. Any comments or concerns?
Real quickly, I would be in favor of hunting that additional property, but in the interest of the resident concerns, I will yield.
I know that we tried to work with farmland last year, and I don't mean to say that farmland doesn't work with us, but they have hunters.
Mhm.
But to the extent that there's the ability to access some of those lands, if they don't have enough people hunting them to make that actually a productive hunt, I would ask that we reach out to them to see if some of these volunteers could work those lands.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I believe, just in talking with farmland about this specific issue, I do believe they also work with BOMA to an extent. It's something that's been coming up lately, but I can pass it along as well during our next meeting.
I think there's some tracks along Woodside that typically don't get hunted, and so.
Could be, okay.
Yep.
I'll pass it along too. Thank you.
Yeah, BOMA has, as noted in the proposal, is willing to assist and supplement as needed.
So they do. Any other board comments? Public comment? No one on the online? That'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 There's no nays, so 5-0. Next item. Community development, item 7. I believe we're removing 7A, is that correct?
Yeah, so 7A, the Cleary Timco Noise minor subdivision plan. The applicant has granted an additional extension of time through June 30th of 2024, but has requested that the plan be considered to be placed on the board's agenda for June 5th, 2024. So the board should acknowledge the grant of the extension of time.
We need to make a motion.
That would be fine if you, yep.
Anyone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, got a motion and a second. I think Supervisor Blendy beat you. Supervisor Lewis? Although I do like the painting behind your head there. All right. Any board comment? Public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none. Item passes 5-0. 7B.
Yeah, so the next item relates to the work that the township had previously engaged Cohen Law Group to work on in terms of an update of the township's existing wireless facilities regulations to ensure that they're consistent with applicable federal law and various regulatory orders from agencies having jurisdiction. This is the intent of this is not to have a full-blown discussion this evening. Joel Winston, who's an attorney with Cohen Law Group, will be at the board's meeting on May the 15th to talk about the ordinance in more substantive detail. So at this point, you have an ordinance, you have an associated fee schedule, and then you have an associated design manual as well. So I just wanted to again ask the board to sort of review that in preparation for your meeting on May the 15th. I think, you know, some of the ordinance, the draft ordinance, there's portions in that ordinance as you look through that are highlighted that relate to sort of policy decisions of the Board of Supervisors. One relates to, again, these facilities currently are only permitted within what's called it's essentially a wireless facilities overlay district. Joel will likely speak to you about that in terms of the adequacy of that relative to the overall jurisdiction of the township in terms of land area, and the need to maybe look at some expansion of that. And then the other highlights really relate to sort of process-oriented things. So whether you wanted to require folks to come before you through, for example, conditional use hearing, that would be before the Board of Supervisors as opposed to going to the zoning hearing board where a special exception would be heard. So those are the kinds of items he'll go over with you on the 15th, in addition to sort of briefing the board on the developments that have occurred in this area of the law. So I would just ask that in preparation for that conversation, just if you could start reviewing that, and if there's any questions that you have prior to Joel's attendance, feel free to send them to me. I'd be happy to ship them over to Joel.
Only a 67-page order.
Yeah,
I agree.
well, that's in part for the introduction because it's going to take some time to get through it, I'm sure. So.
All right, moving on to 8A, general project updates from our engineers report.
Thank you, Supervisor Grenier, board members and members of the public. We have our engineers report prepared for the meeting tonight that we've provided. A few items to highlight that are ongoing and some upcoming as we are basically in the grant season of the year. April, May, June are a lot of the grants that are out currently accepting applications. So I'll touch on a few. One, we are working with staff to submit for May 3rd. That's the DVRPC grant that would be asking for funding to assist for that crossing of Taylorsville Road at the bottom of Woodside that would connect with the trail at the joint toll bridge property. Obviously, in the recent meetings, we've been moving that project forward, but this would request the maximum they are looking to give out for the grant, which is $200,000, and that would definitely be hopefully a help for funding that could assist with that. Sticking with that area, the township, the work being done on Woodside Road associated with the pole relocations. PECO has substantially completed their work of putting in the new poles, which is great to see the movement out there. The next steps with that is that we'll confirm that all their work is finished. Verizon then moves their equipment that's still on the old poles to the new ones. And then it's Verizon that removes the old poles as they do own those. So that is something when we confirm that Pico's done with their work, which should be within this week, we'll be able to confirm that the connection with Verizon to come out and hopefully finish their work in short order would be following that. We also have a meeting next Thursday on the 9th with the contractor, as it was always planned as the poles were finally moved, to revisit some of those portions that would be addressed once they were out of the way of the trail there. Also, in that part of the township, for Highland Drive, just an update on the permit submission that's been pending. As it was identified by the DEP with the pre-application meeting, they wanted the GP5s. As a reminder, that's the utility relocation permits, to be packaged in with the township permits for the culvert replacement. The GP5s isn't exempt from their permit fee because they're the utilities there. So we're coordinating / waiting for PA American Water to have their check ready to put in the application. And then Pico Gas is the other check for that. So that's something we're hoping. They said they had the check processed, ordered. I'm not sure where it comes from for PA American Water, but hopefully it should be at their office down the road here in a couple of days. We'll be able to get that all packaged up. The aim is to get that in hopefully within the next week here. And that will allow DEP to start their clock to review and hopefully approve on first pass. As mentioned in previous meetings, the time frame for DEP is 45 to 60 days for their typical review of those permits. That would put us into kind of midsummer. The plan is still to have the bid package ready for when that approval comes in, so we can get that out to public bid and then start that process to move towards an award. Lastly, just to touch on some of the other grants, I mentioned a lot of the stormwater related grants are due at the end of May. And also the MTF, the multimodal fund grants going into early June. The MS4 projects that we work on as a township, working with staff to kind of package those and group those in a way that we could pursue some of these grants. That would be for projects looking ahead a little bit. And then with the MTF related to some of the work down at Taylorsville, the effort to look at curbing stormwater sidewalk along Taylorsville going from the Mapleville Road area down to the borough. That is something that we're looking to move forward and also pursue grant funding through the DCD MTF that they have available. And that one they did update is a zero match, which makes it even more attractive to hopefully get that funding without a dent into the township budget. If there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Getting back to the Woodside Road, pole replacements, et cetera.
Yes.
I know you're talking to the contractor, but it's getting warm quickly, as we all know, so people want to get outside more. What's our anticipated schedule for like what I'll call the civil works, just to fix the stuff on the ground, like tripping hazards, et cetera? I
mean, they've been kind of on a holding pattern, waiting for those poles to get moved. It still has to wait for the old pole to get taken out. Those are the ones that have been in the way the whole time. So we've spoken with Verizon. They're kind of waiting to do that work. I honestly don't know how long it takes them to get out there to remove the poles. But the timing would be that the contractor could hopefully start on the heels of that. So, fingers crossed sometime later this month to take a look at that. And with that, we would come back to staff and most likely before the board to discuss any kind of proposed pricing that the contractor would have for some additional items that have been uncovered as the project has gone along.
Mr. Kratzer, in terms of Verizon, do we have a municipal contact over there like we do for other utility types that we could?
Yeah,
out a little bit?
we can attempt to do that. We've reached out to Verizon on other issues. So yes, we can happily leverage that if need be. So
We could, yeah, and I'll point out the Verizon contact that we've talked to for Highland Drives project, which is with the utility relocations effort. He confirmed he's the guy to call when Pico's done, and he said give him a call. We'll get out there as quickly as we can to finish our stuff. So it's good to have that direct
Everyone's
phone
speed
number
dial.
and get them moving.
Good, okay. Any other board comments or questions on the engineer's report? Any public comment on the engineer's report?
Hello, good evening. Larissa Luzecki, 18 Mapleville Drive. I'm just inquiring about a maintenance schedule for everything that was cleared last year with regards to the streams near us. Any idea how often you're checking? We would hate to have that get overgrown again.
Yeah, I mean, they're checking on an ongoing sort of basis, both in anticipation of any storm event. Generally they're out checking to make sure things are in order. I believe Derek has, at least in terms of a more comprehensive check, just general check, I think he's doing bi-monthly at this point. So there is a schedule that they're internally following and looking at. But generally speaking, anytime there's any forecast of a weather event, the guys are out taking a look to make sure things are functioning properly.
Great, thank you.
Anything else you'd like to add? You're good.
That's all I have
All
for
right.
this evening. Thank you.
Moving right along, item 9, finance. Welcome.
Good evening, board members. A couple of meetings ago, I presented 3 policies: the investment policy, the fund balance policy, and the capital reserve funding policy. The manager is going to put that on a future agenda for your consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Tonight, I really just want to talk about one new policy and a future policy coming. The future policy coming will be a purchasing policy. That takes a little longer than some of these other ones, just because of the way every township does purchasing a little different. We all have to comply with state laws, and some use CoStar, some don't, some more than others. That's coming down the road, just some purchasing guidelines for departments and purchasing policy for the board's consideration. But tonight, the fourth policy I wanted to present tonight, well, before I present the fourth policy, again, there's 3 or 4 reasons why it's good to have these policies. One, it gives staff direction. When the board adopts a policy, it gives staff's direction of what the board's intentions are. That's important. Secondly, Moody's and Standard & Poor's look to see that you have good financial management and policies in place when they do rating evaluations and when you're getting ready to issue debt. And it's good best practices, the way townships should be doing their business, adopting these policies. So they're the reasons for them. The policy tonight is just a debt management policy. And basically, I'll just do some of the highlights of the policy. It's not to be used. Issuing debt is not to be used for any reoccurring purpose. It's not to be used to fund a general fund or any routine, or the pool, or any routine operating expenses. It's only for capital projects and large machinery and equipment. So that's one very key point. Obviously, we have to do this in accordance with state laws and second-class township code that is built into the policy. That will be structured to match capital, to meet our capital needs. So we're not going to borrow 20 million if this next year, or the board's not going to authorize 20 million if we only can spend 5 in a couple of years. You match your wants with with the financing. You also boards. It's not a good idea to bind future boards. So the policy indicates that you shouldn't take any balloon payment type debt where you have $1 million in debt repayment for 8 years in a row, and all of a sudden you have a $5 million debt payment due. So that's in the policy as well. Call provisions when you can refinance debt. You want it ideally to be 5, 10's acceptable, but with the changing interest rates, sometimes it's advantageous to refinance. And if you have a 10-year call and you're only in year 2, you can't refinance those bonds. So working with the financial advisor, you hope to do 5, 10 at the outside. And I'd like to request that the board set a benchmark of 3%. When does it make sense to refinance your current bonds? If you're only saving 2% and you have fees involved and bond counsel and finance advisor fees, it's not worth it. So a typical benchmark is 3%. When the finance professional, the finance, I can't remember the name. Who's the firm, Dave, we're using for buying financial? PFM?
Well, PFM was the is the current.
Current,
thing.
yeah. So when,
That's
when
been
they,
involved.
they do the analysis and they tell us when it makes sense to do, they show us that we're going to meet the 3% threshold, and then we bring it to the board for your consideration. There's many other, items here, but they're the key ones. Again, another one is we want to generally seek level debt service payments. We ask the citizens to pay a millage to support our debt payment. You don't want the millage going like this, 1 year a bond's paid off, 1 year you have a high payment. So that the goal is to seek level debt service repayments. And I'll be happy to take any questions on this policy or any of the others. And again, as I said, we'll bring it back before the board at a future date for consideration for adoption.
One quick question for you. On item 3, credit ratings, letter D, we have a capitalized term, financial advisor in there.
Yes, that's the term I was.
So I just wanted to make sure that since that appears as a defined term when it's capitalized, right, for the attorneys in the room. I just want to make sure, I'm aware of who the CFO is and who the township manager is. I just want to make sure we're clear on who the financial advisor is when it comes to this.
So,
Or if that should be, or should it be lowercase in a generic term? That's.
well, lowercase and generic term, it's going to be a board approval who approves a financial advisor that we do any bond issues with. We have one that we've used in the past, but it'll be up to the board whether you want to continue with that one or seek another one.
I just want to make sure we know what that.
Thank you for my English lesson.
No. That was more for the attorneys in the room because I don't play one on TV. I know they're going to call it out at some point. Yes.
Unrelated per se to debt management, but I've been torturing you with questions. And in part spurred on by another bank failure last week. I'd like us, as we think about where we keep our money, and I know someone's going to say they're FDIC insured and collateralized, I get it, but I still don't like the idea of having all our eggs in one basket. So I'd like us to include in that policy that there's some type of, management,
Mhm.
little here, a little there, so that we are mitigating our risks.
So primarily, we have our fund in 3 institutions right now. We have Pliget for the proceeds of the 2016 bond issue, which is about $4 million. We have 22 million, which is all the other funds, operating and capital funds together for 22 million. That's 26 million. And then we have the 23 million in the trust fund for the sale of the sewer system. So the 26 million that we have in regular bank accounts per se, Penn Community Bank and Pliget, which is the Pennsylvania local government trust. Again, that's all our money in one basket, so to speak, or 2 baskets for that. Dave and I were discussing this earlier today. One thought that you might want to look at, you may want to consider is perhaps setting a threshold of 50%, no more than 50% of our budget, budgeted funds be with any one institution. And then I would seek rates from other institutions to diversify the money a little bit and put it in other banks. And of course, we would get their collateralization. We would get their audited financial statements and, review those as best we can to, make sure they're in good, sound financial position.
Yeah, I don't know if 50% is a number. I leave it to the board or to you. I am aware that some school districts have similar provisions, so maybe there's guidance there, but
Okay.
yeah, that's
Okay.
what I'd like to see.
I'll be happy to, work with Dave and look at some other places and, make an amendment to the investment policy.
Related to actually what you just said, maybe putting that on paper, relative to investigating financial advisors and who we work with. If we had a statement in here akin to RFPing that service, more along the lines of what you just said, though, rather than RFP, but just to make sure it's clear that we're not just going to go with a single firm. We're going to actually investigate and review and get the best cost, best practice possible. If we could add a line about that.
Yeah, we can do that. Yep.
Pretty solid though, Barry. Thank you for putting this.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other board members have comments on or questions on this particular policy?
And just one thing in regards to a financial advisor, they typically work for a percentage of the deal. So they're not going to give us an upfront cost. They may give us a percentage. So this is what we'll charge of the total deal. They may give us a flat rate, but more, depending on the amount of the issue. They have fixed costs and variable costs, so
Yeah.
they'll provide that.
Well, to that end, when we do have a deal like that, that we make sure that if it's a rate, it's an up to rate or something like that, that before we agree upon a payment on a certain percentage, that the board votes on that payment amount.
Well, yeah, you will sort of, and Maureen might know this better than I, but there's going to be a bond ordinance that you pass. And I believe that'll have the bond counsel fees in there, that'll have the financial advisor, paying agent fees, that'll, it'll say whatever, we borrow $12 million, here's the net and here's what the difference is. It's bond counsel and financial advisor, trustee fees, paying agent fees, all those things. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And it'll be approximations or up to a certain dollar.
Okay,
amount.
not to exceed amount type
Not to exceed
things.
amount.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Anything else?
Move on to the next one. Or Supervisor Lewis, do you have any comments or questions?
No, you covered it. I'm good.
All right.
Okay. All right, thanks. Thank you.
Any public comment on the policy that's put forth here? And there will be, again, this is just the discussion tonight. We'll have a formal vote at a future meeting, and there will be more opportunities for public comment. So, looking forward to that. All right. Any other items of finance?
Nothing else for the finance department.
All right. Take it back to you for item
Okay.
10, manager's
All right.
report.
Sounds good. So the first item this evening for the board's consideration, and you had previously authorized advertisement of this ordinance, is an ordinance authorizing execution of a cable franchise agreement with Verizon Pennsylvania LLC. The township, through the Bucks County Consortium, engaged Cohen Law Group to negotiate on behalf of communities within Bucks County. The franchise agreement that resulted from that has been provided to the board as well as reviewed by the Electronic Media Advisory Committee as well. This ordinance is just simply authorizing entering into that cable franchise agreement. The duration of the franchise agreement is 5 years, which is less than what is typical in the past. Typically, they've been 10 years. But again, as has been detailed in the sort of executive summary memo from Cohen Law Group, with sort of the changing technology in this space, Verizon was sort of pushed to the brink in terms of duration. So Cohen is has reviewed it and is recommending the township's consideration of entering into this franchise agreement. So the ordinance authorizes that if authorizes the execution of that agreement if the board adopts the ordinance.
Would someone like to make a motion? To this one?
So moved.
Second.
Ooh. James has it. All right. Motion by Supervisor Blendy, second by Supervisor McCartney. All right. Any board comment or questions on the ordinance? No? Supervisor Lewis?
Yeah, just real quickly on this one. About 6 years ago, I authored an ordinance that would provide a comprehensive privacy option for broadband consumers in Lower Makefield. And it was modeled after work that was done in Seattle. And I did that for two reasons. One is, we have a challenge with people cutting the cord and moving to IP delivered streaming services. So we're getting less revenue over that. And second, in general, the federal government hasn't done a really good job of protecting people's privacy. And this agreement removes the ability for Lower Makefield to do that. Now, that ordinance was not finally passed, and that's okay. My hope was that by driving that ordinance and giving Cohen Law Group a specific negotiating lever, we would do better rate-wise. It's very hard for me to say whether that's the case or not. It's I think, Verizon is looking at this market in a very specific way in terms of they're not even, 5 years was a stretch for them. So in general, I want to bring that up for people just to have an understanding. If there's questions about that, I'm supportive of the agreement. I think we all know that there's a challenge with cord cutting from our revenue perspective. The glory days of cable fees are probably long past. So these are things that we need to just plan on going forward, and people should just know that will, as by signing this, will no longer be allowed to offer a privacy ordinance in that way. So, but other than that, the agreement's acceptable to me, and I'll be voting for it.
Thank you, Supervisor Lewis. Was there any discussion from the Cohen Law Group related to the privacy issue? I remember 6 years ago, you're saying that we had, I think generally the board was in favor of the concept. I think there was some discussion about opt-in versus opt-out at some point. But that's, it's something that was discussed pretty regularly back then at different levels of government and what we could do. I'm curious if Cohen has addressed that moving forward. It is a concern.
Yeah, I don't see anything specific to that issue, at least being addressed in the sort of summary memo in terms of the actual agreement.
It's in the prohibitions in the agreement, so you have to kind of find it. It's not easily searchable in the PDF. So,
Yeah.
I think this is a 5-year ordinance for what it's worth.
The 5 years, 5-year agreement, yeah. And again, the agreement is not unique to Lower Makefield Township. It's essentially a standard agreement that's being entered into with municipalities, not only in Bucks County, but municipalities that have Verizon cable service throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So
To Supervisor Lewis's point, this may be from the privacy perspective. This is something that I think about all the time as well. That may be something we look at our federal regulators to help out with if they ever get to that.
yeah, I actually spoke to Dan Cohen a while ago. And so we talked about this as sort of a level because of some of the legal elements of it, and it certainly caused a stir with broadband companies, which was part of the intent there. And he was well aware of that as a negotiating lever in that process when we talked. It's been a while, but these agreements have taken a long time to occur. And I think for those who are curious about this particular issue, there is renewed interest in congressional level of a comprehensive privacy law that is a bipartisan one from a representative in Washington, Kathleen McMurray-Rogers, and the senator from Washington State. So there is actually a pretty good movement on that where there wasn't for the last 5 years. There's hope on that.
Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Any more board comment? Any public comment? Doesn't appear to be anyone online either. With that, I'll call the question then. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes 5-0. Next item on the agenda is item 10B. It's resolution 24-12, amending the Lower Makefield Township fee schedule.
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the board. So before you is an amended fee schedule for 2024. I'll just sort of briefly highlight some of the changes that are being made. Monica, if you could come up on the one change related to pickleball, that would be appreciated in the event that there's questions. So most of these changes are sort of changes that are reflective of or enabled by ordinances that the board has recently either enacted or modified. So the first change in the fee schedule relates to short-term lodging facilities. Again, as you know, we're looking at additional sort of changes to the ordinance governing those facilities. But as part of sort of compliance monitoring, the township entered into an agreement with Granicus to be able to monitor these properties to make sure that they're operating consistent with the terms of your ordinance. And so there's a subscription cost associated with that. And so we're proposing to increase the license fee on short-term rentals and from its current, which I believe is $100 to $300. That is generally reflective of sort of best practice as it relates to what fees generally are in communities. Generally, the fees are somewhere between anywhere from 1 to 2 times essentially the median nightly charge being charged by the property owner. In our case, it was I think $199. So we sort of split the baby at this point. It's at 1.5 times the average nightly rate. The next change relates to vacant and foreclosed property registration. Again, that's a semi-annual registration twice a year, so every 6 months. So this is just reflecting that the fee is $300 every 6 months. And again, you engaged HERA Registry to help with managing that process. As part of the amendments to the vacant and foreclosed property registration ordinance, you did also in that ordinance enable the establishment of a boarding fee for the boarding of doors, windows, and sort of other openings to try to discourage or disincentivize houses being in a visible state of vacancy that you would have with boarded up windows, doors, and other openings. So the fee schedule establishes that it would be a $250 fee for every 3 openings or fraction thereof. And then they would also be paid every 6 months. So that would sort of correspond with the frequency of registration that is required. The next change that I'll speak about, again, you enacted a special events ordinance governing special events, which again spoke to the establishment of a fee for special events to be established by resolution. So this is the fee resolution to do that. And so for the application fee, essentially, it is $100 per day or portion thereof. So if again it's a multi-day event, it would be $100 per day that the event is occurring. This is, again, just to be clear, not the fee that would be payable in the event that special services are required. So the ordinance also establishes entering into arrangements with a private party. So if there was a large event that required either a police presence or fire presence, that those fees are not covered by these fees. That's a separate fee that would be negotiated in terms of us providing service to that event provider. And then finally, I'll generally turn this over to Monica, but the final sort of change that's proposed in this fee schedule relates to pickleball and registration fees associated with reserving pickleball courts, and Monica can provide some additional context on that.
So this fee is similar to a lot of our other rental. We rent currently volleyball, we rent fields, we rent pavilions. We're running into a little bit of an impasse where we have so much demand for pickleball and no way to reserve courts or no way to manage some of these larger groups that are coming in and kind of self-registering or self-booking out the courts. We're receiving a lot of complaints about not ever being able to get on the courts, or, you know, a group that was there or that we were booking the courts all of the time. And it really wasn't us, it was other groups booking the courts. So this is kind of in response to that. The staff and I reviewed many different options. This seemed to be the best and quickest option. Another would be maybe to gate them and do it like the dog park, or, you know, just charge the large groups all league fees, just like we do for all of the other leagues. They're large groups. So the rental fees that we're asking for is an hourly rate. So generally 4 people play at a time. So the rates are 16 for resident pickleball club member, $20 for non-resident pickleball club member, $24 for non-member resident, and $28 for non-member non-resident. And that would be divided generally among 4 people who are playing. So they would have to work that out on their own. So it's 1 hour. So the least expensive would be $4 per person per hour.
Is that the last of the fee changes?
Yeah, so those are the changes, again, with sort of recommendations on those respective fees. Obviously, any changes that the board wants to make as it relates to those items, but those are the changes that that are being recommended, and the changes that are amendments from the earlier fee schedule that you adopted at the end of 2023 for 24.
Quick, on the special event permit fee. We will ask a question. On the special event permit fee, that's for anything that qualifies as a special event regardless of size, correct? We don't split it out by.
There was some, I think there was some attendance threshold in the actual ordinance that governs special events. I think it was attendance of over 50, I think is what it was. Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. With that, I'll ask for a motion if anyone wants to make one.
So moved.
Any second?
Second.
All right, Supervisor Lewis seconded. All right, any board comments, questions, concerns, et cetera? Hearing none. All right, anyone in the audience? All right. Doesn't appear to be anyone online or on the phone, so that being said, I will call the question. All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0. All right.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much. The next item for the board's consideration is a policy, compliance policy related to Act 151 of 2022, which was an act that was enacted by the Pennsylvania legislature, or signed into law by the governor, legislation that was passed through the Pennsylvania legislature, which requires additional notice provisions for local governments when a data breach is discovered. Local governments are now required to notify victims of data breach involving personal identifiable information within 1 week of the breach being determined. And again, the definition of determined or determination is spelled out in the policy. And then there's also some notice provisions that are required to the local district attorney's office. Maureen's firm worked on, we sort of had a general framework policy, and Maureen and her colleagues at Curtin and Hefner have suggested some amendments to that policy, and those amendments have now been incorporated into the document before you. I don't know if you have any comments or on the work that you did or what you were trying to do or strengthen or.
Really just trying to bolster what was already provided. And we did research on the statute itself, the guidelines for the statute. We also looked at different school district guidelines because school districts are required to have the same policies, and they're usually fairly robust. So we looked at really pick and chose a couple of school districts that we were familiar with, both on this side of the state and on the western side of the state, that we thought had good policies in place. And also we looked at the Commonwealth's website for the Cisco, or the Chief Information Security Officer, definitions and requirements, et cetera. So we just looked at all those and just try to incorporate what we thought were the best of all of the above into the revisions that we made that are before you.
So do we, I think we had some discussion about whether or not
Yeah,
best time to,
Yeah, I mean, at the board's discretion, again, some of the amendments were made, you know, later than we normally would have wanted to get those out to you. So recognizing that, you know, if the board is comfortable and has had an opportunity to review it, that's fine, and you can take action. If the preference is to essentially have this on a subsequent agenda for your consideration, that's fine as well. So again, the requirements of the act are they're effective, they're on us, so it's just essentially codifying how we're going to address and meet our obligations under the legislation.
short version is this at- meets at least the minimum requirements of the act plus some best practices.
Absolutely,
Yes.
yeah.
Any board feelings on what we have in front of us, or do you want some extra time to review, or?
I read the motion. I'm fine with making the, sorry. I read the policy, so I'm fine with making the motion.
I agree.
So moved.
All right.
Second.
Any board comments, questions, concerns?
Hmm.
All right. Any public comments, questions, or concerns? Anything online? No red light turned on. All right. That being said, call the question. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0.
Sounds good. Mr. Vice Chair, I do have just some general sort of updates that for the benefit of the board and the public, if you may, just informational items. Is that okay? All right. So one, and these folks are leaving, but I just wanted to provide one update. It's sort of relevant to some of the work that we've collectively been doing on sort of flood mitigation, stormwater management. We've been working with Representative Brian Fitzpatrick's office, looking at a funding opportunity through the Community Project Funding Program. The representative's office has been very helpful in making us aware of this opportunity. It was a relatively short sort of window of time, but we did submit an application that will ultimately be submitted through the Congressman's office to essentially implement many of the sort of, I'll say, conceptual projects or potential projects that were identified by land studies in their work. So it was an $8 million funding request, again, sort of broadly defined so that we have flexibility to the extent that we're awarded funds, looking at new stormwater management facilities in that area, retrofitting existing facilities, looking at things like stream bank, floodplain, valley restoration, again, sort of implementing the more comprehensive, holistic, sort of watershed-based or drainage basin-based sort of approach. So I'm hopeful with the work that we've been doing collectively and the support of our federal representative, as well as the support that we're getting from the county and the state, that we can be competitive and hopefully receive some of these funds, which would be great news for the community in terms of realizing these benefits. So that's in the works. Also, just want to mention that we are meeting with Land Studies tomorrow on the staff level, just to sort of, as they're completing their sort of second phase of the work, just sort of getting a status update, making sure we have an understanding on where we're at, what remains there, and then also talk about sort of implementation as well. So there'll be more coming out of that meeting. So that's all good stuff. And then another item unrelated to stormwater that we've talked about at various times over the course of the roughly year and a half that I've been here. Ebert has been working on a response to the PADP review letter relative to the Act 537 special study that's required in order to transfer the permit from the township to Aqua as the now owner of the sanitary sewer system. They have finalized the response letter. This is now in Aqua's hands to because there's certain obligations that are being placed on Aqua. They're just reviewing it, so that should be submitted here shortly. So I'm hopeful that we'll reach some conclusion there and then ultimately be in a position to transfer the permit, because we are currently still the permittee in the eyes of the Department of Environmental Protection. So just wanted to provide an update. I'll obviously, as once that is submitted, I'll provide a copy to the board via email, and then as we're going through that process, I'll make sure to update you as we proceed forward. So just a couple of informational items.
Getting back to your first announcement, is there anything recommended or that the board or residents or anybody else could do to try to positively impact Congress review of funding for this?
I'm sure there's always, stuff that could be helpful in that regard. I know the representative has prioritized this project. Again, there's certain, for lack of a better word, allocation, if you will, to members. And so I know he is supportive of this. But I can check to see if there's anything in particular that they recommend that would be helpful to them as they're advocating on our behalf. So I can circle back on that issue. I would just say, say thank you to the representative for, recognizing the need and pushing on our behalf. So, but if there's more specifics, I can get back to you on that.
I think there's an energetic community that would be very happy to support in any way they could.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. So those are all the general updates that I have at this point.
All right. Is Monica coming back up, or is this you?
We
11
can-
Parks and Recreation.
Yeah, we can go sort of, if you want to come back up, just in the event that there's questions. So the next item on the board's agenda is consideration of authorizing execution of an addendum to the lease agreement between the township and Yardley Makefield Soccer relating to the existing turf field at Mackles Field. The township and YMS have been party to a lease agreement that was dated June 19th, 2019. That sort of governed use and scheduling of the field that was installed at the cost of Yardley Makefield Soccer Club. The addendum is in part to address some issues in terms of noncompliance with DCNR requirements that when there's public funds used for the acquisition of land, that land needs to be accessible. Again, as I said, this facility was paid for using private funds. However, the land in which it sits was acquired using public dollars. So we've been working cooperatively with YMS to try to address that issue to make sure that we're consistent with the requirements of DCNR's policy. So the lease agreement essentially, puts scheduling authority on the township and allows for general use during sort of organized use, and that use primarily being YMS, again, as they were the party that funded the improvement and that is maintaining the improvement or the facility at this point. And then in addition to sort of permitting that public access during periods of non-use by the general public, the other sort of provision is that it extends sort of the lease term on the field between the parties. So that's paragraph 8 in the addendum, extending it from September 8th, 2020 or 2031 to September 7th, 2047. That is in part, and George is here actually as well, the president of YMS, That's in part related to just sort of the capital investment that YMS has made in the facility, and then also anticipated replacement of the turf and making sure that, again, they have access during essentially the useful life of that investment that they've made and plan to make. The lease, the addendum has been reviewed by DCNR. It is consistent with all of their requirements. They have no objection to this. So YMS has executed the lease agreement or the addendum, and now it's before the board for your consideration. Happy to answer any questions. Again, either myself, Monica, and George has also been working cooperatively with us to address this issue.
So moved.
Second?
Open up to board comment and questions? One quick one, Dave. I'm just, as you're reading things, I'm looking, you mentioned 2047. I think it's 2043.
I'm sorry, 2043. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
I have a couple questions in terms of item number, paragraph 2, when we talk about scheduled use. As YMS scheduled use of the facility generally occurs at various times between 4:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Friday, and from 8 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays throughout the year. In terms of when others can use it outside of a scheduled use, obviously there are a lot of Sundays where there's nobody there at all. A lot of other times where nobody's there at all.
Yeah.
Does this prohibit anyone from using those times?
No, it's just saying, it's just noting that this is, sort of general timeframes of use, to the extent that it is not being used at that point. The addendum to the lease agreement would provide it, would make it available for public access, and it defines what public access is.
Are we going to maintain is Park and Rec going to maintain a schedule, kind of like we're talking about for pickleball and other things, about when it's going to be used by YMS?
We already do have a schedule with YMS. It's just when it wasn't in use, we didn't allow no one else could be on it based on the prior contract. So now, just like all the other fields, if you're there for a pickup game or you want to go practice, for a little bit on the turf when YMS is not there, we still have some provisions within our code, for large groups and rentals and that type of thing, where we'd still have to follow code. But as far as pickup or just use in general, that would be available now.
Is that something that we could put that schedule or whatever, I'm calling it a schedule, but that calendar up online so people could understand when and when not?
All of our calendars are public. If you go onto our Community Pass site and type in facility calendars, it's all available now.
Including the turf?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Like, ideally, I would remove those timeframes from the agreement, because they don't really mean a whole heck of a lot. The timeframes are based on what the schedule actually is in practice.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I don't know why we need them in there. The other comment I have is extending all the way to 2043, and that's almost 20 years. There may be, not everyone loves turf, and in every place there's a big push right now to remove turf from active use. I think that's pretty common at this point. So I don't know about extending all the way to 2043. We may want to go a different direction with Makefield at some point in time, or heck, YMS may want to go a different direction in Makefield at some point in time.
I don't think anyone can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? All right.
And I just had a quick question on that. Maureen, can we terminate the contract at any time for the agreement? Is there a provision in there that we can terminate at any time between that now and 4043?
Give me 1 second. I did just see. Right now, it looks like YMS has the right to terminate, not the township. It's a unilateral right to terminate the lease.
I wouldn't be comfortable with that.
Notice.
It's their turf. They built it. They built it in good faith, even though we apparently didn't understand our obligations. And I think that the compromise that they put forward because otherwise we're the ones on the hook for paying hundreds, thousands of dollars back. So there's an underlying lease, right, this board, I think even you might have been here, James, you weren't, that we did change the language because it was a self-renewing lease and we did, adjust that. But I'm actually, when I first heard about this problem that we were faced, I was like, uh-oh, how can we possibly solve this? And I'm pleased with how both sides have been able to come together and find a resolution that works for everybody.
So if we didn't approve something moving forward, the township would have to pay $154,000 to DCNR.
And I would argue we'd also have to buy the turf from them.
Well, that might be a litigation issue, to be honest. I don't know.
Well,
But let me finish my point. Two things. One, a unilateral agreement in any agreement is negative towards the township. I can't vote in favor of that. And two, extending an agreement on a turf field for 19 years or so is just way too long, considering all the issues we've had with Makefield and the planning that we're doing at this time. I think the design of Makefield could change, the approach of Makefield could change fundamentally, and tying us down for basically 20 years goes, I think, a step too far.
I guess my only question would be is why do we give them the caveat to terminate the agreement, but not ourselves? I mean, what's the advantage of that? None, right?
That was agreed to in 2019 in the original lease. That's what I'm referring to. It's not referenced in the addendum. The
Correct, it's
addendum just incorporates all terms and conditions of the underlying lease, other than those that are changed in this addendum.
I think, and I was not with YMS when any of this happened, but, when they replaced the turf, and the turf that's there now is the turf that I think is the standard. There are some turfs that are being removed, but this is like super uber good turf. When they made that investment, there was an agreement, like, you can't kick us off until we get,
The effective life of the turf. Yeah, I understand.
and that's what I think the carryover is. I mean, to relitigate these things that we
Yeah,
agreed to.
the existing term is already through 2031. So the extension is an additional 12-year period, which is intended to cover them through what they're saying is the typical useful life of one replacement cycle beyond this.
The 2019.
So they're getting a 12-year extension of term in exchange for permitting public access to a facility that's currently prohibited from public access is prohibited on.
Just to clarify, the initial agreement that we made in 2019 was good to 2031. This addendum is now taking us to 2043.
Correct. And
Well, and what was the advantage of that?
the extension of time,
Yeah.
that was again in exchange, I mean, from YMS's perspective, and I don't want to advocate on behalf of YMS, but right now they have exclusive use of a facility. We permitted the exclusive use of a facility, which is not in compliance with Commonwealth requirements. In exchange for working together, providing us, public access essentially, which is consistent with the requirements of the Commonwealth, they're saying, their get is an additional 12 years of time and certainty that when they make an investment, an additional capital investment in the replacement of that turf, that they have use of that for at least that duration of time.
So what happens if we didn't agree to that and we basically said, what you're
So
saying?
you're going to still be locked in until 2031, and you're going to pay DCNR essentially going to repay grant funds that were received, some time ago, again, which has been calculated with compound interest to be $154,000.
So it costs $150,000. We don't go the route of extending to 2043.
Correct, and there's no public access. You would,
So if I
Can
could jump
we-
in for a second.
Well, hold on, can we stick on the 2031 thing? If we kept it at 2031, then it's still the turf field that they put in. This is allowing them to rebuild an entirely new turf field at the end of that would last until 2043, right? That's two turf that's basically a turf and a turf
I don't-
replacement.
I don't know if you have any
Right.
context on that. I don't, what's,
If I could just jump in as I was trying to do, I didn't negotiate this, right? But I do know some things about turf and I know how YMS manages their turf. It's no doubt that when other people are going to be on the turf without that kind of supervision, who's on it, what they're doing on it, that there's going to be additional wear and tear that they did not bargain for with the original agreement. Our solicitor, in negotiating with their solicitor, felt this was a reasonable compromise to allow them something to make up for the additional wear and tear. And I mean, it's not just going to be more people on it, it's going to be people on it who probably won't abide by all the rules of turf. And so seemed like a reasonable compromise to me, but I'm just one person.
No, and I get that. I'm trying to figure out what the advantage is to having it go out to 2043. The 2031, I understand. The 2043, you're saying we're going to get penalized by,
They have 31 already.
yeah.
And I think I'm kind of guessing here, that the solicitor thought giving them something because it's not what they originally bargained for, which was an exclusive turf that was going to be, I mean, I don't think my kids ever got to play on the turf, right? And I have one D1 athlete. They never made it to that. Like it's,
Yeah.
so now when they're not there, who knows who's going to be doing what on that turf? There's going to be additional wear and tear. So I'm guessing that was just like, oh, we're changing the agreement. You give, I give, here's a new compromise. So is it the length of the addition? Oh, Barry's here.
Yeah, I mean, in speaking to the gentleman from soccer, and he confirmed what I was thinking. In 2031, when the agreement ends, the board can say, okay, we're not renewing, and then they're out that investment. They invested the money to build the soccer field for a certain length of time. And if the board, so they're looking for the stability, that's correct. That's what they're looking for, the stability, that after 2031, they still have that field that they invested a lot of money in. If otherwise, the board could end the lease in 2031.
No, I understand that. When was the
Yeah.
original turf field built? What year?
This is the second turf field.
Yeah, so when was the original one built? Does anybody-
2008? Yeah.
It's almost 12.
So that turf, is bad turf, and that turf
Okay.
is gone. But I think this one was put in 8 years ago. I think when we first came on when Dan and I first came on the board, I think the turf was just replaced.
It was when the
20
contract was renewed because the
I mean,
contract.
it probably was tied together. I mean, I would assume that it was in 2019 in which this lease agreement was entered into, was about the same time the turf was replaced.
So the effective life of it is about 10 years.
Yeah, it's a turf. Now turf is having been part of the design in the past. They're usually 8 to 10 years is standard turf.
So 2008 to 2019, that would be about, so makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we enter into agreements, land use agreements or land lease agreements with other users in the township, specifically Patterson Farm, and none of them are that length for a specific reason, right? Like, we just want to make sure that especially if they have an opt-out, that doesn't really make sense to me. If there's no opt-out, shouldn't be on either side.
Except, I mean, I don't know what the turf costs, but I'm going to say it costs at least $500,000. So nobody else who we enter into agreements with make that kind of investment, and then we can just say, oh, sorry, changed our mind.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, we're trying to find a fix for a solution that we're stuck with. I mean, a problem that we're stuck with. And so to that extent, like, we just have to come up with something that's fair to everybody. So I hear what you're saying about it's not reasonable that it's only cancelable on their side, but I don't know how it could be, if we canceled it on our side, are we going to pay them back?
No, I think if you're talking about a 10-year life cycle of a turf and the new turf was just installed in 2019,
I think it was around 2019.
2020, so and at 2030 would make sense, or an end at 2031 would make sense, and then we reevaluate at that point. I think extending it automatically gives the option to YMS to it's almost like we're signing a two turf contract with them, not just the initial turf. And if they're willing to reinvest after 10 years, the effective age and the life cycle of that asset is gone after 10 years.
But
I
you're
think
fundamentally
that's-
changing the terms of the agreement.
that's
They have
what they have.
they have exclusive use.
But they only have exclusive use because we gave them exclusive use, right?
Yeah, but that's what they bargained
Well-
for. Like, they wouldn't have built the turf. They wouldn't have, I guess, I don't know. I've never spoken to George about this, but they wouldn't have built it. They wouldn't have made that investment. We said, you know, you're going to have it exclusive for 10 years. Then yo ho ho, we find out that we couldn't do that. And we're trying to get out of the situation we're in so that we don't have to pay those fines. And so I think that's why we negotiated to extend it, because we're changing the fundamental contract that we entered into them.
And I understand that. When did we find out that we weren't allowed to do that?
I think it was 2 years ago.
When we started the Macclesfield Park study a year ago.
So it was deemed at that point that we were in violation of the grant because we had a user that was using an asset that was exclusive just to them. It
Yes.
wasn't public.
Yeah.
So I mean, at that point, it's just
So it kind of compromised future DCNR funding. So if we were violating our, the previous grant that we had from DCNR, if we were going to move forward with, say, Macclesfield Park master planning and we went for DCNR funding, then there's a chance that we couldn't get it because we were in violation.
In terms of exclusivity, as long as YMS is on the schedule to use turf field, then it's theirs to use. They have right of first refusal, it sounds like, the way this is written.
Yes.
All right, so they're going to get to use it pretty much every waking hour when most leagues or other people would be interested in using it all morning, all day, and all night, both days of the weekend, and if they, anything after school time. So it sounds like the only time that it might be open is during the day, during the week, when
Well,
most people. would
Our,
not-
our other fields, when they're available, they're available. So say PAA books all these hours. If there's no one on the field at that time, then you can play. So if YMS maybe book those times, but they're not out there actively practicing, then it would be open to the public.
Yes, if I want to go kick a ball around with one of my daughters, we could do that if they're not on the field.
Right.
But
But if they show up for practice, they have
Yeah,
the
yeah,
permit,
of
then you'd have to move.
Because they paid for it.
Well, we also paid to manage, I mean, they've had exclusive rights to.
Right, 'cause they paid for it.
Excuse me, right? We're going through Macclesfield planning now because Macclesfield is overused and people recognize that the scheduling is off and we want all of our user groups to have equal access to Macclesfield.
We went through Macclesfield planning because we realized we didn't have enough fields in the township.
I disagree.
I know you do, but I don't want you to state things
No.
as if they're a fact and a truism when it's your opinion.
No.
You're
it is not
entitled,
an opinion. Excuse
it
me.
is your opinion.
All right, I'm chairing the meeting this evening. Please don't cut me off.
I think you keep cutting me off.
I don't at all. Okay, so getting back to
And
this.
for that, we
We
disagree.
voted,
But
excuse
you can
me,
keep raising your voice and keep cutting me off. Oh,
don't make me use the gavel. This is ridiculous.
it is, but
Okay,
you keep
so I'm
cutting
going
me
to
off.
continue with my line of questioning because I started this. All right. We've had multiple years where we've had issues trying to figure out how to deal with Macclesfield and other fields because people want to build fields all over this town. Now, the issue with Macclesfield, which has been stated in the Macclesfield Master Plan, is that we are focused on improving flow and usage and scheduling at Macclesfield. That is what we wrote into the plan. It's not building more fields. It's not doing anything else but that. That's what was presented at the Macclesfield workshop, and that's what we're moving forward with. Once we get through that, we can look at other things, but that is the plan that was approved. Bar
plan
none,
has not been
non-opinion, that's fact.
That plan has not been approved. It's been presented, but it has not been approved by this board. And honestly,
Moving right along.
I don't know when we decided to get rid of fields at Mackloff, when everybody knows we
Nobody's
don't have enough.
Getting rid of fields.
Yes, we are. We're getting rid of a baseball field, a lighted baseball field. That's what's in the proposal, as well as soccer fields. Yes, we are. That's what
Yep.
the proposal is, to put additional driveway, but not actually improve the egress, because we didn't look at that. So again, I have an
Okay.
opinion, you have an opinion. We're both allowed to have our opinions, but we're not allowed to say they're facts.
Until they are facts. So moving right along, I am definitely not in favor of the lease as written. I think, as you were stating, Mr. McCartney, 2031 is a more realistic timeframe. I think a one-sided deal, as this is also, I think we need to look at ways to make it more even. We often have conversations about fields, about, hey, they'll give us this, they'll give us back this. Remember, this is a township park. This is not a private soccer club's park. That's the mindset we have to have. We want them there. We want to be good partners, but it's a township park first and foremost, and that's how we have to manage it, in my opinion. That being said, are there any other board comments on this particular lease agreement?
I had another quick question for you.
Sure.
So just so I get this right, because I'm trying to frame this as far as, time on the turf. So if another, say Frisbee comes to you and says, hey, we want to pull time on a turf, does that have to go through YMS first?
I'd probably consult with them, make sure they don't have any practice, but yeah, they could probably play on there.
And how about football? If football says, hey, we want time on the turf, we want, we're pinched on games, we're over at Memorial Park, we want to be able to put some of the little nuggets out on the turf field and let them have, some time maybe on Sunday or a time where it's down. So you're basically saying that Park and Rec is going to be in charge of basically managing the time on the turf, but there's not going to be one user group that's going to have preference over the other, because I'm okay with it if it's that way, but if it's still being framed where YMS is going to have exclusive rights to the turf 24/7, for them to have a right of first refusal kind of doesn't make sense, right?
I mean, the truth is YMS will be using the facilities during most prime times that leagues would be practicing. So it'd be kind of tough to schedule leagues. But it says public access will be consistent with other rules and regulations regarding to township facilities for permitted facility use, so to follow code.
And I think the problem with that is historically at Makefield, specifically on the turf, and the turf is one thing, but even in fields that are adjacent to the turf, there's been a policing by YMS during non-YMS hours of people using those turf, where they would put signs out saying field closed, field not available. They would chase people off of those fields if they were using those fields during non-YMS time. So I don't want to give a user group the ability to facilitate what happens at Makefield more than anybody else, specifically residents. If the whole point of the exercise is to make sure that residents have access to it, we want to make sure that residents have access to it. So I'm just wondering what the dynamic of that is. How's that going to
Yeah,
work?
so just to make sure that there's clear understanding, so public access shall not include allowing access to any private organizations or other formalized organized groups that charge fees for membership or participation. So your football example, they would not be permitted to use the turf field that was constructed at the expense of YMS.
Got you. So same thing for Frisbee, same thing for football. Any user group that it's an organized
That's
group would
organized,
not
that's
have
hard.
access to it. So
Yeah.
it would just be a one-off if a kid who probably is part of YMS already decides to go up and kick a ball, or get some practice time on YMS.
Field hockey,
Field hockey, sure.
They can play on it.
If people show up just like the baseball fields and the baseball team is not using, PA is not using the fields, and they show up with, say, a dad and their kid or their mom and their kid, and they want to go play, they'll be able to do that now, where they couldn't before.
See, I think in theory that works, but I think practicality it doesn't, right? So if PAA is putting time into these baseball fields and they're doing lines and they're working on mounds, and there's somebody that comes in with doing a pickup game or whatever it is, like a family that goes in and they are technically, in their eyes, maybe destroying the work that they just did, or if somebody decides to go up to the turf and they're not abiding by the rules of the turf, I guess. I just want to make sure that these user groups aren't associating these assets as theirs, right? So how do we do that? How do we get a disconnect between it's township facility that we're allowing you to use versus it's your user group that has police and say about it? Like
Yeah.
I think that's
mean,
kind of
You could buy the facility.
For what, 154,000?
Well, we'd also have
No,
to buy the
or
turf.
Whatever the cost of the field is.
well, I mean, well, the other option is the turf gets removed and then we're in compliance with with DCNR.
Well, I think we still owe them money,
We would
but I
still
think we
owe
would be in a
YMS.
breach of contract situation with YMS then.
Yeah. Well,
And that's why, again, James, I just want to make sure you understand whatever you think is fine. But the current lease gives it to them till 31. And And so I think what was done here was that because they're no longer going to have exclusivity, and I'm going to say Sunday mornings are going to be wide open, my guess. There'll be times that are more times wide open, especially because YMS has moved so many programs out of that, and the turf is very big, right? I mean, even when YMS is using it, they have like 5 or more teams on it at a time because they're, not for a game, but for practice. So I think there's going to be more access to it. I agree, if we were starting from square one, this sounds a little loopy, but we're not starting from square one. We're trying to fix a broken situation to the best of everybody's outcome.
I mean, I would almost lean towards saying, take it to 2031, forget the exclusivity. I don't think that matters. I mean, I don't think that it's going to happen, right? I don't think that there's going to be an open area for people to just go on the turf, or open days for people to go on the turf and just mess around. I just don't see it. I think that the stigma of YMS at Makefield is very ownership rights. You know what I mean? Like, there's been situations where I've been at LMFA football games, and there's 2 fields behind those where if football players kind of leaked into that area, we had YMS coaches push back into the football field. This is YMS ground. Like, so I think that there's already that there. So to offer ability to use something verbally or even in a contract, when it's practicality, it's not going to be there. I think it's kind of it's doesn't really make sense. You know what I mean? Unless you guys are going to police it and you're saying you really can't, because no other organized user groups can even use the turf.
Oh, I lost audio.
We can hear you, John. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, there
I
it
couldn't
is.
hear Monica.
Your microphone might be dying, or
It's coming.
Hello.
yeah, you're good.
Perfect.
Yeah, you understand it. I mean, it's just one of those things where you want to make sure that if that's the case, then we better be screaming it from the rooftops, right? Because I think that historically the case is nobody touches that turf field. It's YMS's. They paid for it. They're the ones that paid for the investment, even though it's on our property. They're the ones that paid for it. And I think the YMS, to their credit, have enforced that, right? They've been very strict about anybody even being on it. But now that it's not going to be the case, we want to make sure that everybody knows that. And I don't know how you do that.
Well, I mean, part of the agreement suggests that we put signage up that says, the rules and regulations and procedures. So we could put ample signage out there, just the same as we have as YMS has historically, no trespassing private property sign. So, we can educate and make sure that we educate about it, but, it's up to the board, what you decide to do and how to move forward.
Yeah. Maureen, do you see any downside into going into such a long-term agreement from a legal standpoint?
I, of course, didn't negotiate this addendum.
Sure.
I understand why it was put in place, just because it is a trade-off. It's a negotiation, just like anything else. It's give and take. There is they're giving up exclusivity, and in return for that, they wanted a longer lease. I do note in the lease that YMS has the right to replace any of the improvements at any time. So concerns about the turf itself being acceptable or safe, et cetera, for our children, they have the right to replace it, and they may have that in plans to do so. But just as a reminder, I appreciate the conversations that have been going back and forth, but if you don't approve the addendum, the lease itself stays in place,
Sure.
which is through 2031 and exclusivity.
But then we pay the $154,000
And you pay the
fine.
$154,000.
So is there anything in there about liability during the renewal period up to 2031 and also to 2043? If there's liability on the turf, if there is something that happens from a non-YMS person that's on that turf, who's responsible?
There is, that is addressed in the addendum, that it will be shared. Depending upon who's using it, that's who's responsible. They will assume liability.
So if it's a resident during a non-permitted event, then we're responsible?
It's not a YMS.
What if the asset itself caused the liability, right? So if the turf is coming up in certain areas or the fence is broken, which it was a couple years ago, that one section, and somebody climbs on it who's a resident that was there during a non-permitted or a non-YMS event, we're liable, the municipality then is liable.
Because it's not exclusive and it would be the township, yes, you would be.
I mean, that makes it a little bit tricky, only because we don't have any other situations in that park. Like, there's not a playground group that owns the playground equipment, right? That's responsible for maintaining it. We are. So now we're partnering to make sure that there's an asset that's on our property that is maintained, that if something happens, right? Like, I guess it's a unique situation. I mean, even the pool, if there's anything that happens to the pool, we're liable. It's not like this, there's a slide company that owns the slide, and if something happens on the slide, we're responsible. So,
Yeah, akin to that, or just to follow through, then you would go back to the installer of the turf or the producer of the turf if the turf caused the problem. But specifically states that the township agrees to provide sufficient insurance coverage and indemnification for the public areas and use, including but not limited to liability and property insurance coverage, which would include the turf field, because by this addendum, it becomes non-exclusive
got
to
it.
IMS.
Do you see that as a potential, like, bigger liability, or do you think that that's, I mean, it's kind of a unique situation, right?
I think it goes with the territory. I really do think it is consistent with the spirit of the addendum itself.
Okay.
It does make sense to me.
I mean, we do have a new board. We have a new solicitor. So we have new ideas about certain things. I would recommend that we go back and renegotiate the addendum such that it's not one-sided and it's a shorter term, so it's more manageable and we're not tied to something for such a long time. From that, 2031 seems like a reasonable timeframe. It's still we use the term exclusivity a lot to your comment, James, about other user groups not allowed to use it, basically. So it's very limited to who can use it. Basically, parents and kids running around when it's available. Not much beyond that. Which is, I don't know if that's in the spirit of what DCNR wants at these parks. But as it is now, I'm not comfortable with the terms of this lease. It took a really long time for us to get responses to things. And for our solicitor to work things out, but I think I'm not in favor of it as it stands, and I'd like to see the two parties go back to the table with maybe a slightly new outlook, understanding that when this was started, the Makefield planning also hadn't really begun, and now it's in full swing. So there may be even different ideas that come into play based on what participation in the Makefield study are as well. That's sort of tangential to it, but is still maybe something to think about.
Can we table this at least?
You can move to table.
No,
You can't.
we cannot?
Absolutely do
I
that.
mean, you can, but I'm the maker of the motion.
Oh, poo.
Well, you could I'll move to table.
I mean, we'd have to run her motion.
I mean,
No, doesn't tabling a motion.
I understand, but so I guess I want to say is I'm not aware of any dilatory tactics on behalf of YMS or their solicitor in coming with this. I've not heard that. And if that's something, I would once again urge that there be equal communication throughout the board so that we're all on the same page. I believe that YMS, through their solicitor and our solicitor, acted in good faith to get this here before us. So if it's the will of the board that, we talk about this amongst ourselves and try to move forward, again, I'm only one of five, but I would urge you to remember that we, not you, but we agreed to this lease that we're now apparently trying to change. And that's not really how I roll. So if you guys want to put it off and talk about it, I'm not going to stand in your way.
I do have one question that may be integral to the discussion, and Monica, you may know, not I. Do you know when the grant proceeds have to be repaid? Is there a time frame in which they have set forth, DCNR has set forth to try to negotiate this? Because right now, it sounds as if we're in violation of DCNR, and they've set out a mandate that, $154,000, give or take, is due.
I don't recall a time frame. Dave, do you?
Yeah, I don't think, I think it just related to, again, sort of the potential to receive future funding from DCNR as it relates to the property. But I don't know that they said you have to pay it by X date. And it's compounding interest, so as the delay, the amount of, it'll presumably just go up as, not,
It's costing money.
not significantly, but there will be some adjustment to that figure.
Do we have any recourse of going back to whoever drew up the original agreement for some type of financial compensation for putting us in a situation where we were now losing grant money, or we have to repay grant money? Like, who made the original agreement to YMS that basically voided our grant? Was it a solicitor? Not you, clearly.
It's not me.
Yeah, clearly this solicitor before her.
I mean, I assume it would have been in 2007 when the original lease agreement was entered into by the parties.
Yeah, do we have it? Is there like a statute of limitation on that or
There
something?
is a statute of limitations on legal malpractice, and I don't.
Well, how about the renewal? The renewal was just only 4 years ago, right? So at renewal time, whoever did the renewal missed it.
Well, this isn't even couched as a renewal. It's couched as a lease agreement, a new lease agreement in 2019. So I don't even know if we really could go back to the 2007 lease. I think it looks like maybe the slate was cleaned and a new lease agreement was entered into in 2019. So that's what you're working with right now. I don't think we, for historical purposes, you may look at the 2007 lease, but I don't think it has any bearing on the.
So do we
discussion
have
right now.
recourse for whoever wrote the 2019 lease, whoever legally wrote that document? It may or may not, if we have a copy of the 2019 lease, was there verbiage in there stating that we were basically abandoning grant money by entering into this lease? Because I didn't know about that. I don't think any of us did.
I think the abandonment of grant money or whatever the penalties are happened the minute the original lease was signed, unbeknownst to anybody, right? Nobody knew. I'm honestly a little bit confused as to how it's just the turf, because theoretically the baseball fields are also under the exclusive use of different, I guess it's the whole
Oh, it's
private
okay.
property piece of it. I got it.
Yeah, yeah,
I
it's
worked
okay
myself through there.
to allow.
But, you know, if you remember the lease that we were confronted with at that time, the original lease was self-renewing. And we by putting in a new lease stopped that. And that's the way we had to go to terminate the self-renewing piece of it.
But I think what Maureen's saying is that because we did put a stop to that and we established a new lease at that time, whoever was establishing that new lease, did they do due diligence to be able to disclose to the board that by getting and entering into this lease that we were potentially vacating grant money?
I can't answer that. I don't know what the due diligence was on anybody's part, on YMS's part, on our part, on the board's part at the time the 2019 lease was entered into.
So none of this was discoverable during, obviously, your time, your tenure. So you only discovered this during the master plan analysis.
Yeah.
And it may be one of those things that is buried in DCNR rules, and most likely that's exactly what it is.
I think I've heard that before, right? I've heard that if you take grant money for a public project, you can't then turn it into a private project, right? So I think
most
that's,
things, like
yeah,
conservation easements, et cetera.
sure.
I think the surprising part is that when you look at the price of the whole MAC concept and the part of the DCNR, I don't think anybody realized that that little bit of money would spread out across, if anybody was thinking about it at all, right?
I
But
wonder what the original, do you know what the original grant was?
I don't offhand, no.
Do you know by any chance, Dave?
I think we should have made it a sewer plant back in the 70s, and then none of this would have happened. That was the
And
plan.
on top of it. If you don't know, that's okay.
I don't know off the top of my head. I may have access to it, though.
Well, I'm fresh out of ideas.
Personal opinion is that we either table or whatever we do, take a step back, have our new solicitor consider what we've all been saying and propose in my view anyway, a better agreement that is more favorable to the township. It's a very generic phrasing and term, but that's, I think, as written currently, it's not very favorable to the township. Terms are way too far out in the future. I think there is good reason to push, 2031 timeframe is still a significant time, and I think YMS has earned that at least in terms of a time frame. But pushing it out 20 years, a lot changes that in that time, and I would look to better balance there.
So I'm happy to do whatever I have to do to give people additional time to think about it, but I'll just say it one more time because I am like a broken clock. There's a lease in place that gives YMS exclusivity until 2031. We cannot change that with an addendum. What we're going to debate about is does it go out further from 2031? But they're not going to suddenly say, we invested all this money. I'm putting words in your mouth, YMS. We invested all this money. We built this turf in good faith, and now we'll only stay here till 2025. I
No,
can't imagine them doing that.
Say.
No, I know, but we keep saying we don't like it going to 2031. We're stuck with that. We're stuck with 2031. So it's from there that we move forward.
I don't disagree with that at all. So would that require vacating the motion? What, from a Robert's
We can
rules
just
perspective?
table it.
Or
Go ahead and table it.
And just table it.
so if we table it, we have a motion on the table that we would have to vote on, which is the current addendum.
No.
Or can we just table the whole
We can
issue
Table the whole
and that
thing.
motion goes away?
The motion is tabled. I'll still be the maker of the motion whenever it comes back, but it'll be tabled.
Did you officially motion table or?
I'm not tabling myself.
Okay.
You
what?
can table.
Just check.
I'll table you, Suzanne. Motion to table.
Second.
All right, call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion's tabled till further notice. All right,
Very wordy, George. You're very wordy.
item 12, solicitors report.
Thank you. I'd like to announce that the supervisors all present this evening, in addition to Manager Kresker and Chief Coluzzi, attended an executive session prior to this evening's Board of Supervisors meeting in which litigation matters were discussed. In addition, we are working on the amendment to the short-term rental ordinance to incorporate changes discussed at our last Board of Supervisors meeting. We are working on that. Can't promise that it'll be before you at our next meeting, which is May 15th. Hopefully it will be, but we are working on it. It does require Bucks County Planning Commission review and approval. So that is another step to that amendment. In addition, we're working on an amendment to the zoning ordinance based on our discussion of the last Board of Supervisors meeting as well. And that, like the previous amendment, must also go to Bucks County Planning Commission for review and approval. And right now, that's what's on my list of things to do, most importantly, in addition to the YMS lease now. So those are the things that Kurt and Hefner will be working on.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Any
you.
comments or questions from anyone on the solicitor report? All right, hearing none, moving right along. Supervisor reports. Supervisor Lewis, you have anything to report?
Yes, I'm here in Edmonton, Alberta, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person. So I don't have a formal report. And so, yes, you get to see, and it snowed here yesterday. So I have that going for me, but that's all I have to report at this time.
It definitely did not snow here. All right, actually, as we're sitting here, this evening, the Patterson, not the Ad hoc Property Committee, the Patterson Farm Master Plan Advisory Committee, I believe is the full name, will be meeting soon. I do believe, Mr. Kratzer, that as we're sitting here this evening, we got notice that members of the Historic Commission and Patterson Farm Committee walked the site with the Pennsylvania SHPO, which is the State Historic Preservation Office.
That is correct.
Also PHMC, Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission, alphabet soup of government agencies here. And they recommended that we apply for listing for both farms on the historic register, National Register.
That's correct. Yep.
That is great news. So more to come on that, but that's pretty cool. Electronic Media Advisory Committee, Farmland has not met. They'll be meeting next week, I believe, but that's all I have. Ross?
I have no report.
All right. Supervisor Blondie?
The only report I have is the Airport Review Commission has asked the board, or is asking the board, if we would consider writing a letter or, taking action in terms of noise violations from the airport. I believe that there's an email forthcoming if you haven't received it yet. So I would ask that we talk about that, or joining in that, or putting something on the next agenda so we can see how we feel about that.
Thank you. And last but not least,
I have nothing to report at this time.
all right. Any other business?
Just as a follow-up to sort of the question, and again, not to circle back on this, but so the grant amount was $100,000 for the acquisition of 63 acres back in, I thought I saw 1980 or something about it. Yeah. So that what they did is they divided that by the number of acres. It was $1,587 per acre. It's been 37 years since the grant. So they compound interest 4 times annually on the 2.59 acres, which is the area that we're talking about in terms of private. It has exclusive use. So the grant payback amount at this time, I don't know why that reference is 154, because it's a 158,845, and that was back in August of 2023. So there's been additional compound interest on top of that since that time.
Do you know if the Makefield study raised the flag about this whole thing to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, that was part, yes, that was, yep, in part.
Cool.
Doing property research associated with the evaluation of the future for Makefield.
All right.
On other business, Dave, I'm not sure how to move it forward, so I say to you, and then I don't know if I say to Maureen as well. I've been talking to the staff about some of our sign ordinances, and I would like to, bring something forward to this board to consider. If anybody wants to hear me go on about signs, I'm happy to, but I think that there's an opportunity, especially with the potential changes going on at Shady Brook, to make sure that our signs and the lighting of them and the size of them, et cetera, is in keeping with the character of the community that we'd like to have, and I'd like to get moving on that. So I don't know if we have to ask Maureen to start drafting something, or if the staff can start it and then she can make it look perfect, but I don't want to lose more time on that.
I'm in favor of that as well.
Okay, I mean, if that's general consensus, we can start working on something, yeah.
Well, do
I
we
mean, we
have
have-
specific requests that would be considered as part of a sign ordinance?
Well,
Because that,
yeah,
in
I'm
terms of
hap-
what you're looking for, that, I mean, if you said, hey, these are 5 or 6 things, then I think, we could place that on the agenda and consider and draft thereafter. Wouldn't have a problem with that, but I mean, I want to know what what policies specifically you're looking for with revisions to the sign ordinance.
So part of it came up in interviews that we recently conducted that brought to my attention some of the signs that other communities have dealt with in terms of, quality of life issues. So
Mhm.
I don't want to say it's neon, because I personally love neon, but things like that, the size of signs. So a number of years ago, we did not have electric signs. Signs had to be lit by spotlight or front lit. We've gone away from that. And I think maybe there's, we swung the pendulum a little bit too far. Because, sorry, CVS, when I drive up to the new shopping center, it's like a beacon. That sign is bigger than any other sign in the township, and it lights up the sky. And
It's our very own Middletown app.
yeah, I don't want to see that again. So I'm sorry that I can't actually say 12 inches, 18 inches or whatever. But I
mean,
think that's something I would leave to the experts to put before me and then.
but in terms of what direction you're looking to provide, is it that you want to limit lighted signs, types of lighting, sign size? Because
Yes.
different municipalities have different rules about how signs work. We don't have any billboards, I don't think, in Lower Makefield Township, which is a pleasant thing. If you were to go to California, certain municipalities in California have a specific sign look and feel. For example, Carmel by the Sea has very rigorous sign ordinances in terms of what signs look like. Sao Paulo, Brazil has rules around signage and advertising that are very unique in the world. So if it is, and this is where if you said, hey, I'd like to put, or I'd like to say, these are the 5
I
or
think-
6 areas.
Yeah, I
That
think
would give some direction for if we were to consider that down the road, that we could say, okay, here's where our major concerns are. And it's very hard. I appreciate you can't necessarily say, you know it when you see it. I think that's Justice Potter Stewart said, not about signage, obviously, but sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, John. I think I'd start with Newtown's policy. I think that what they've done would be to my liking. I want to, sorry to pick on a specific business, but I'm a little surprised by in the ShopRite Shopping Center, the smoke shop. Anybody who smokes, God bless you. It's not my thing, but there's a lot going on in that building, in that window. And I think that maybe we even want to address how much of a window can be covered in signs. But I have not researched it fully. I don't have all the answers. But I think those are 2 areas we can start with.
Would you be comfortable if we asked the solicitor to review the Newtown sign ordinance in comparison with ours to identify potential things for us to consider? And at least that keeps the process moving forward, but it would give us some direction. If you think that ordinance is particularly helpful, then from a starting point, you say, okay, here's the 5 things in that Newtown ordinance that we don't have. And does that address all or most of your concerns? That would be good. And then we could step back and say, okay, what additional things do we want to look at?
I thought perhaps it made sense to start with staff before we engage dollars, but I'm
That's fine
happy-
too. Yeah.
I'm happy
Well, I
either
mean-
way. That's why I said
Well,
Dave,
or-
Maureen, however we want to go, but
Yeah,
I
I mean,
love that idea. I also, I'll just, Upper Darby. Upper Darby has a sign ordinance that we might want to look at. Thank you.
So would you, if I could ask the township manager, would you be comfortable if, for example, our planning department reviewed neighboring municipalities, including Newtown and Upper Darby, to come up with potential recommendations for sign ordinances?
Yes, we would be comfortable doing that, and then in turn, after doing that, we could engage the solicitor in that process.
Do we include Sao Paulo, Brazil too? I'm just curious.
That one's a very,
Now, because I have no idea what it is.
I was going to recommend Princeton. There's areas of Princeton where it's tastefully done. You really have, I mean, there's a Wawa there. You have no idea it's a Wawa, and most Wawas look ridiculous. So yeah, within reason.
I think you have a lot to choose from the neighboring communities. Having sat in the seat in many of those communities, I know they have strict sign ordinances. And I think if you drive through Bucks County into Princeton, you'll see many you like, and we can do a lot of comparisons.
Thank you.
I think the concept of a general look and feel that we're going for is, not to put words in your mouth, but that's kind of what we're looking at. The specifics, that's where we get into the weeds and things that staff can help us with.
Thank you. Uh-oh,
Actually,
I think we have a call.
yeah, there we go. And Mr. Kratz, are there any updates on the HRC ordinance or something akin to the HRC?
So no updates at this point. Well, I should take a step back. There was some outreach to the county regarding looking at the county's Human Relations Council and the potential of sort of expanding its role to adjudicate complaints. The county has not gotten, other than acknowledging receipt of that request, they've not gotten back to us in terms of any substantive response at this point. So we can continue to follow up. And then I'll follow up with PHRC as well. I did submit an inquiry asking for some support from them on this issue, and they have not gotten back in touch with me on that at this point, so I can follow up with that. And then in terms of the draft ordinance, I don't know if we've given that to Maureen at this point, where it stands, but we can do that as well. Again, at this point, it's just, well, I think you have it. It was just sort of a menu of options for you to consider. So, yeah, future agenda discussion. Yeah.
Get into details now.
Yeah.
I'm curious where we're at. So.
As long as we're talking about it, I was on, speaking to someone from Lower Merion, and they were one of the first in the state to have something like this, and they're actually rewriting it because of changes to the state. They found that their ordinance, which was at one point, I'll say groundbreaking, has been rendered moot by what the state has done. So that might be another place we can look to leverage their learning so that we come out with something that works.
All right. Thank you for that. Any other business? I think we've covered a lot of other business. All right. Next item 15, appointments or reappointments to boards and commissions.
I'd like to make a motion to reappoint Paul Roden to the Environmental Advisory Council.
Second?
Wait,
Beat you to it. I'm sorry, John.
he and I are college alumni. I should have gotten the second or the first.
Oh.
All right. Any comments, questions, or concerns from the board? Having worked with Paul Roden, I'm glad he's
Public comment?
raising his hand again. Did you have public comment on that? On this board or the commission?
No, not on Paul, but on, you want to
General?
make a public comment. Yeah, yeah.
That's,
Okay.
we'll
We're
get
almost
you there in a minute. All right, I'll call the question then. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Nobody. Welcome back to the EAC, Paul. Glad to have you. All right, at this point in time.
My bad.
Your gavel? Right here, right? Remember, you gotta flip it on this side. Again, we had public comment on non-agenda items at the beginning of the meeting. We're having another round of that now. So as a reminder how public comment works, please state your name and whether or not you're a Lower Makefield resident and go for it.
Great, thank you. Chris Hoover, 903 Greenway Avenue, Edge Hill Gardens. Resident for 26 years. 20 of those have been really good. The last 6 have not. So I'm here to comment on the short-term rental ordinance. As some of you know, I live next door to a very challenging neighbor. It's been 6 years, and I'm here to discuss additional options for you to consider. And this would probably help me significantly with the individual living next door who's running basically his house like a hotel. So my suggestion is, one, anything shorter or anything, let me see, sorry, a minimum 30-day stay for a full house rental. I mean, this is very common. In fact, I have the luxury of having 2 other homes in other areas, one in Pennsylvania, one in South Carolina. These communities have this ordinance. It's a 30-day minimum, and no changes, nothing around, minimum stays as far as, 7 days or less than that. So it's a minimum of 30-day stay. Less than 30 days, the owner has to be living in the property or in the house. So that would help, people who need to rent out a room or 2 to help with their bills. They could actually, as long as they're living in the house, that would actually be a very good option for them to do that. But for the situation I'm dealing with, where the homeowner purely just bought the house to run it as a hotel. That's not something that I want to live next door to. So I'm asking for your consideration to add these to your solutions.
Any? But we had, I think you know this, but we have been in receipt of your email, which included those recommendations.
Yeah, New
Um,
York City actually
I-
has similar ordinances.
Based on your, I looked it up after your email, just, so
Good.
I appreciate it.
Good.
I think, we're constantly looking to improve this ordinance to address the issues that you're experiencing. We've dealt with this particular resident for quite some time in various ways, and we're constantly looking to improve the ordinance, as I said, to try and mitigate this so that it's not affecting your life and your neighbors' lives. At this point, this is public comment, right? So we have your recommendations. I think as we continue to look at the ordinance and how we can improve it, we included new fees this evening, I believe, as part of our fee schedule, is try and beef that up. There's different things from a enforcement perspective that we tried to beef up. So I think as we continue to move forward, not to speak for everyone on the board, but I think this is an issue. I know even Supervisor Lewis and you have been talking a lot. I know Supervisor Blundy was at the forefront of this way back when. So we're all looking at how to do better. So I think we'll take that into consideration and see, in addition to what you've recommended, see if there's anything else that we can do as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say this. I mean, if any of you had to live next door to this, you would be taking action. It's been a challenge. And honestly, it's pushing my wife and I to the edge of wanting to move, just like two of very close neighbors of ours had to move. So, yeah, so I'd appreciate if you guys could consider these.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Lori Gray. I am a Lower Makefield Township resident. Actually, this was on the agenda, but we didn't ask for public comment, and it might just be my lack of education. But you tabled the discussion under Parks and Rec for Macclesfield. Is that why no public comment was?
Correct.
So I'll have public comment when it comes back up again? Okay.
You could make a comment now if you'd like to on an issue, or you could,
Oh, okay.
and next time as well. You don't.
Oh, all right. Well, since how I'm up here, I might as well. So a couple of concerns I have is, living next to Macclesfield Park, we worked very closely with George. He's been really great to work with over the last year and a half, specifically regarding the lights. And my concern would be that if we open this up, and I get it, that most of the time he would be there during the times when the fields would be lit. But I thought I heard, should they not be on the fields, then somebody else could be on the field. And who's going to manage that? Because if it's not going to be the time, I mean, Monica knows, I already contact her and George every time the lights are left on or something happens with the lights. So I don't feel that I should have to monitor that as a resident. So that's one concern I have. If we open this up to anybody using those fields that are lit. And the second thing I question is, and I may be wrong on this, and I was hoping George was here, but in the back of my house on the non-lit fields, my understanding is that those are all YMS soccer equipment there. So if the township doesn't own them, people use them all the time, and many times it's groups of people coming from New Jersey. So I have asked, when YMS isn't using them, seeing how they're not township property, if they could be removed. And I was of the understanding that that's just really not, it just doesn't make sense for them. They're too heavy to move, blah, blah, blah. But if YMS doesn't have, then if we go into this addendum and they don't have specific use to those fields, then their equipment shouldn't be on those fields, would be my understanding. So that would be my other comment to make, that if they're not going to be used, then remove the equipment that's YMS's equipment.
So you're talking about K, K1, M, and H, I think.
No, I'm talking about, I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
The non-lit, the smaller.
Behind my
section.
house, though,
Yeah.
along the bike path
Yeah.
or the path that goes from you know, the
Yep.
bike
Mhm.
path.
Yep.
you know,
K-
all the way
K1,
through.
yep.
Behind the cemetery on the back end.
No, on the other side of the bike path. So if you come in, if you're in Rivergate,
Mhm.
right, and you walk down the bike path,
Mhm.
once you get to the bike path, you go left.
Okay.
And they pack like probably 10, 12 fields back there with their I don't
Yeah,
know.
those were not subject to that addendum.
Yeah.
The addendum just related to the turf field. That is it.
And specifically those things, not only are they not easy to move, but they have to be secured. And when they're not secured correctly, there have been people injured because they fall over. So I would not, in general terms, be favor of moving those back and forth.
Okay.
I think to Lori's point is what she's saying is that if YMS is not, well, those fields right now aren't subject.
Yeah,
to-
there's no exclusivity.
There's no exclusivity to them now anyway.
Right, which is why I've asked, if you're not using them, move the equipment because all it does is promote. I get it that we want residents to use the park. I am not against that, but it's a sports complex. Let's be honest. It's not really a park. So my request was by keeping the soccer equipment there on, that encourages people to come and use them. And they're not residents of Lower Makefield. And I've taken pictures of license plates to prove that they're not residents of Lower Makefield. So my request was then that just promotes people to come and play soccer. And they're YMS equipment, not township equipment, right?
YMS owns those goals then, correct? Or
Yes,
no?
that's,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
They do.
yes.
But
It goes back to my other point, right? It's,
well, I mean, it's a public good, right? They own them, but it's for a public good, right? They're giving, right? Because I agree, I often see New Jersey license plates there, but I also know that people in Yardley, like people who live in the borough, don't have any park to play in but MAP.
yeah.
And so, it's like a gift to the public that they're, and you don't have to play soccer on those fields. You can do whatever you want on those fields. But if you want to play soccer, there are nets. I hear what you're saying.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thanks for allowing me to comment. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Any other public comment? Anybody on the line? I don't see any lights. We're good.
That light works.
That being said, I don't need to make a motion to adjourn. We can just adjourn the meeting.
There
correct?
being no further
All right.
business.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Meeting is adjourned.
Good night.
I'm not gonna.